Hey friend, today we are going to be painting this landscape of Sequoia National Park. I can't wait to teach you how to paint this painting. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so today's tutorial, we are going to be using Winsor Newton, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, Terra Verte, Sap Green, Perylene Green, and Prussian Blue. Feel free to use whatever colors you have on hand. I'd say a brown, a green, and a blue, kind of like a rusty orange and brown mixed together would also work really well. And with my brushes here today, I've just got my size 16 Princeton round brush, my size 4 Princeton round brush, and then a sponge brush to paint a nice wash across the paper. To get started, I'm just gonna do a nice wash of water across my paper, all the way from the top to the bottom. And this is just gonna help get a really nice wet and wet, foggy kind of quality with the trees in the foreground as well. Okay, so just to lay out a hint of a sky, I'm just doing a very small touch of Prussian Blue. And I just want a really, really pale value of it. Just a subtle blue. It's almost barely there. And because the background is wet, it's really gonna spread out nice and even. But I'm just gonna apply this at the very top and then just in a funnel down below to about 2/3 way down of the painting. Next up, I want to apply some of the Terra Verte color, and I really feel like I'm pronouncing that totally incorrectly, but it's this really nice dusty pale green, and I absolutely love this Winsor Newton color. It's just so beautiful. I'm gonna apply some just in this bottom area here, just below where the trail that we're gonna paint later, or just above it. I want this kind of fogginess quality to our landscape, so that way it just will give it a lot of dimension when you see some of the faded trees in the background by utilizing wet and wet watercolor technique here. So I'm just gonna apply a good saturation of this color. I'm gonna do just a few blots in the sky here because that'll be some areas of trees that are foggy. Okay, so next up, I'm going to grab some Sap Green, and I just want to get in these lower corners here at the bottom, just a foundation for the forest floor here, using some Sap Green. And while this is still nice and wet, I'm going to add some Perylene Green, and I'm also being mindful, I will have a little bit of a trail in the center here, but because the brown will be so dark, don't worry if your green kind of overtakes a little bit. The brown's gonna be definitely a deep value of the brown, so it'll cover and overlap over the green just fine. So now I'm gonna take some Perylene Green, and it's this really rich dark green color. And I have all the colors I use linked to my Amazon storefront, but you can of course mix this color by doing some brown, some blue, and some green. I would say like a Payne's gray would really give a lot of depth to any green that you may have into your palette, or a touch of black and brown, just to get this nice rich green. Okay, so now that I've laid out some of this deep green, I'm just gonna let that hang out. I kind of want maybe just a few touches of the bright green from Sap Green and just a deeper value of it, just a few pops before we move on here. Okay, so now I'm gonna carry on with the Perylene Green just a bit, and I just want to paint just a touch of it here, and then I'm gonna blot my brush as I transition to help kind of spread this out. And I'm doing some vertical brush strokes here just to start. And again, being mindful that there's gonna be a path right here, so I don't wanna go too far down. So I'm just doing this really loose vertical motion. Okay, and while the sky is still slightly wet, it's kind of set just a bit, but while it's still a little bit wet, I want to start to paint some of the sequoia trees that are far in the background. And I am using Burnt Sienna to start, and then I'll actually shade it a little bit with some Burnt Umber. But just to start, I'm going to do this nice bright kind of rust color and then detail it in a bit. Okay, what I love is that this isn't super in focus. It's gonna bleed out, which I do want. And then maybe there's a second smaller sequoia next to it. Sometimes they can grow in pairs, which is really cool. Redwoods definitely do that as well. Maybe a couple smaller ones just off to the right. Okay, maybe I'm gonna paint just a crooked kind of angled one over here. Really playing with the variety of height and angles. Okay, next I'm gonna start to kind of build as the page dries a little bit. I kind of wanna build to the foreground a little bit more, so I'm going to lay out one of our larger trees that's more towards the front. I think sequoia trees are some of the most incredible things on the planet. They are just so fascinating, and they're thousands of years old and just massive. They are just awe-striking. So if you ever get a chance, definitely try to go and see Sequoia National Park for sure. And it's not too far from Yosemite, so you could actually do a trip where you can do both. Yosemite is also another favorite, and they also have a few sequoias as well. They have a Mariposa Grove that has some beautiful sequoias. But both national parks are absolutely worth seeing. Okay, I'm now going to lay out a second sequoia off of this one a bit. Okay, now my biggest sequoia is going to be right in this gap, so I'm just carrying on with the same burnt sienna color for now. This one's gonna be probably my biggest tree since it's so much closer. And towards the bottom, I'm gonna kind of fan out the trunk here just a bit. So that way you could see some of its roots that are in the forest floor. Maybe there's just one more sequoia way off in this background here. Okay. While the burnt sienna is still a little wet, I'm gonna take some burnt umber and just help darken, give shading to the sequoias here. So I'm just gonna use my size 4 brush and just kind of go in a vertical up and down kind of textured motion. And our shadows are going to be mostly on the left side because the sun's coming from the right. And then I'm just going to use the tip of my brush with light pressure with my hand just to add some texture to the bark. And then I'm just gonna do some touches of the burnt umber on some of the other trees as well. Next up, I am going to use burnt umber just to add a little bit of a pathway here, little trail. So I'm just gonna do this subtle S curve, and it's going to widen towards the very bottom of our paper. At the very top, it's nice and narrow. And then towards the left and right, I'm just gonna reapply a little bit more of our Sap Green. And I'm going to make sure I add some almost just touching the trail. And now I'm just gonna carry some of the Sap Green just at the base of these sequoias on the right. And then some towards this left corner. And then I'm just gonna layer a little bit more of the Perylene Green. Next, I'm just mixing some burnt umber and some burnt sienna, and I'm gonna apply a few branches, especially in the more dominant trees, these two and this larger one in the front. And I'm just gonna angle these branches with my brush to go downward. So they're kind of swooping down. I'll do a few on the left and right here. They almost look like upside down Y letters. You could see kind of the Y shape, very loose and jagged. Some can overlap each other. Next, I am just gonna water down my brush with just a touch of this same color, but just a lighter value. So I want lots of water and just a touch of this blend of burnt umber and burnt sienna. And I'm just gonna do just a few really just pale branches in the far background trees, just a few, not a lot. And again, I'm blotting my brush just to help lessen the value and to lighten that color. Next, I'm going to use Terra Verte, and I'm going to use this nice soft green to just kind of build some of the greenery around the trees off of the branches. So it's a nice, really pale, dusty, muted green. And I'm just going to use that to just kind of help build the dimension to start out. So I'm applying some off towards the right here. All the way to the bottom. And maybe just a touch of that in between these two trees as well. And then from there, I'm just gonna blot a few touches of Perylene Green. Just a few touches just to build the contrast. And then just a few touches of sap green as well. So from here, I'm just gonna add a few touches of the Terra Verte, Sap Green, and Perylene Green just to build the foliage and just to give a nice contrast of green all throughout the sky here and just to build those branches up. Okay, so I'm just gonna add a few more touches of Perylene Green and Sap Green just to add a little bit more depth, especially towards the forest floor here. And I'm using just this light pressure with my brush and just dabbing at an angle, at like a 45-degree angle, to get this nice texture. Okay, and my last step here, I'm just gonna smooth out any rough edges of the greenery that I just want to kind of blend a bit better. That way not every little branch is super defined, but it's nice and loose. So I'm just smoothing out a little bit of this texture, letting some of the texture pop and be more in focus. And same thing for the greenery. I'm just gonna smooth out some of this rough, wet, and drying texture just a hair bit, especially along this path here. And that is it. I'm gonna let my painting just sit and then peel off the tape, and I'll pull it up so you guys could get a closer view. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tutorial. Be sure to like this video and then subscribe so you don't miss any future tutorials.